It was the largest landing of troops and military equipment in history, involving over 156,000 soldiers, 23,000 paratroopers, 50,000 vehicles, 11,000 aircraft, and 7,000 ships. During the initial assault, more than 30,000 bombs were dropped and over 1 million gallons of gasoline were consumed. 11 months later, Germany's unconditional surrender and Hitler's defeat occurred. Join me on an exhilarating, step-by-step journey through history's greatest landing. We'll dive into the dramatic events of D-Day and uncover how this monumental operation led to the fall of the Nazi regime in Europe. On June 6, 1944, the Allies landed on the beaches of France in an unprecedented invasion that would mark the beginning of the end for the Nazi regime in Europe. Opening a second front in Europe was of crucial importance to the Allies. After defeating Hitler in Africa, Italy, and Russia, the time had come to bring the war to France with a massive landing from England in an effort to finally destroy the Nazi regime. This invasion would go down in history as Operation Overlord. However, the Germans had heavily fortified the Atlantic coast to repel any attack, so it was first necessary to divert their attention to a location far from the chosen landing site, the region of Normandy. Intelligence services led the Germans to believe that the attack would take place at the Port de Calais, the area closest to their bases and the most heavily fortified. To do this, a fictitious army was created under the command of General Patton in Dover, complete with inflatable tanks, fake landing craft made of wood, and a massive amount of supplies and men who only existed on paper. Allied spies also played their part in this deception, none more skilled than the Spaniard Jean-Pujol, known as Garbo, a double agent who successfully convinced the Germans that the real landing would occur at Calais. To complete the deception, on D-Day, Allied planes and ships dropped millions of strips of aluminum over the English Channel, blinding German radar with thousands of false signals, while destroyers created a fake fog in front of the landing fleet. Despite the elaborate deception, the beaches of Normandy remained one of the most fortified regions on Earth, part of Hitler's Atlantic Wall, which stretched from the Pyrenees to the Baltic Sea to protect the Reich. To make matters worse, the Nazi dictator had placed one of his best generals in charge, the desert fox himself, Erwin Rommel. Rommel had covered the beaches with 3 layers of traps and defenses, turning any attempt to land into a near-suicidal mission. The first line, located at the tide mark and submerged at certain times of the day, was filled with devices designed to sink troop transports, steel hedgehogs, anti-tank barriers, and logs elevated at an angle, with anti-tank mines attached to their ends. Once this first obstacle was overcome, the Allies would face the beach itself, blocked by row after row of barbed wire and riddled with deadly minefields. Further back stood hundreds of bunkers and pillboxes, from which the Germans would sweep the landing zone with machine guns, mortar, and artillery. Faced with this formidable challenge, the Allies had to rely on ingenuity, developing a new generation of tanks and vehicles specifically designed for the invasion. General Percy Hobart's department came up with a new series of mine-clearing tanks equipped with steel rollers, chain flails, and bulldozer blades to clear the beach and pave the way for the infantry. Added to these were the Sherman DD tanks, an adaptation of the main American battle tank, fitted with 2 propellers and a canvas screen so it could navigate across the sea to reach the shore. The American infantry also had some new tools to assist in their difficult mission, including Bangalore torpedoes. These were explosive-filled tubes that could be used to blow apart barbed wire without exposing the soldiers to enemy fire. With everything ready for the big day, the weather suddenly took a turn for the worse as wind and rain began to intensify. It seemed that the entire plan might fall apart due to the rough seas, but Allied Supreme Commander Eisenhower made the decision to press on, no matter what. Shortly before midnight on June 5th, 1,200 planes took off to deploy 24,000 paratroopers, whose mission was to strike the German rear ahead of the landings. D-Day had begun. The objective of these airborne soldiers was, first, to secure the bridges leading inland, and second, to neutralize the artillery batteries whose fire would endanger their comrades on the beach. In the early hours of June 6th, the paratroopers began to descend over occupied France, identifying each other by small clips that made a distinctive clicking sound, or by the password thunder, which was answered with flash. The fate of the first arrivals in Normandy varied. In some places, such as the village of 𝕲𝖊𝖍𝖎, they landed directly on enemy positions and were gunned down, with only those pretending to be dead managing to survive. Others, like Captain Winter's company from the 101st Airborne Division, had better luck. After regrouping in the darkness of the night, they headed to the nearest objective, silencing the artillery that had started firing on the beach. The British, on their part, carried out some daring landings near the enemy aboard gliders. They emerged in a rush against the surprised Germans, capturing several bridges, which they defended fiercely until the main assault force arrived. Even more daring were the preventive attacks carried out by the Rangers and Allied commandos on the beaches themselves. They arrived aboard rubber boats with the first light of dawn, aiming to seize strategic positions that could jeopardize the success of the landing. Among them, the most iconic mission was that of the 200 American Rangers who attacked the Pointe du Hoc battery, a steep 30-meter cliff they had to scale under fire with only ropes and ladders for assistance. Once they managed to repel the defenders and reach the summit, they found that the Germans had moved the guns inland. However, thanks to the wheel tracks left behind, they were able to locate and neutralize them. While these troops carried out their crucial tasks behind enemy lines, an overwhelming bombardment pounded the coast to soften up the defenses before the main assault. Over 120 warships opened fire with their cannons, supported by hundreds of bombers and fighter planes. Although the sheer scale of the bombardment was impressive in terms of noise and explosion, much of this fire fell far from the coastal defenses, leaving them largely intact when the invasion force landed. The Allies had divided the Normandy coast into 5 beaches, assigned to the Americans 𝓦𝓍 and the British Gold, Juno, and Sword. These would be seized by 20 for successive waves of men transported in landing craft, which would then return to the transports for more troops. Leading the way were Percy's tanks, tasked with clearing the path and providing mobile cover for the advancing infantry. The toughest challenge the Americans faced on D-Day was Omaha Beach. The coast was dominated in this area by steep cliffs where the Germans had fortified their positions, providing them with an excellent angle of fire. The situation was further worsened by the inaccurate preliminary bombardment and the delay in the arrival of the amphibious tanks, which had been stalled in the rough seas after leaving their transport vessels. Thus, the 4,000 soldiers of the first wave faced certain death when they arrived on the beach around 6:30 a.m., with only one into managing to survive. According to one witness, when the ramps dropped, the men walked into a hell where the crossfire from machine guns made it impossible to advance. Under intense fire, the 1st and 29th Divisions and the elite Rangers crawled from cover to cover until they reached the protection of a seawall marking the high tide line halfway up the beach. As more men reached the seawall, it became possible to organize an attack that would rescue the Americans from this deadly trap. Gradually, isolated groups led by the Rangers made their way through the barbed wire using Bangalore torpedoes and scaled the cliffs, capturing the German bunkers from behind. By the end of the day, 5,000 of the 43,000 assault troops were dead or wounded, with a 50% casualty rate in the first wave. The task was much easier for their comrades at 𝓊𝖏, a narrow strip of land 700 meters wide, which was the least defended area of Normandy, with few machine gun nests and flooded fields behind them. Thanks to this, the Allies achieved a swift victory in just 2 hours, despite landing a kilometre away from the planned point, aided by the cessation of enemy artillery fire midway through their advance due to the paratrooper attack. To the west of the American forces lay the first beach assigned to Marshal Montgomery's troops, Gold Beach, much like the neighbouring Omaha Beach. The coastline was dominated by steep cliffs up to a sector east of the village of 𝓊𝖉𝖎𝖙, where the landing craft were headed. With the tanks still struggling to reach the beach, the British, Polish, and Dutch soldiers launched an attack on 𝓊𝖉𝖎𝖙, where a formidable 75mm gun was taking out every tank that reached the shore. The position was defended by numerous machine gun nests, so it wasn't until 2:30 p.m, after 7 hours of fighting, that they managed to capture the village and silence the artillery. A few hours later, they faced a German counterattack in 𝓊𝖉𝖎𝑙, but by then, the Shermans had joined the infantry and managed to repel the assault with ease. They captured a series of detailed maps of the German defences, which helped them continue their advance inland while bypassing the most heavily fortified positions. The next sector was Juno, assigned to the Canadian Expeditionary Force. The danger here was the many houses built right on the beach, which provided the Germans with numerous strong points from which to repel the invasion. Additionally, a series of rocky reefs forced the landing crafts to wait for the tide to rise before they could reach the shore, exposing them to German mines that sank more than one vessel. Once on the beach, the soldiers encountered the additional obstacle of hundreds of sand dunes, which caused them to slip and hindered their advance. The sector was only secured when the tanks arrived, but it came at the cost of 1,200 casualties. Finally, on Sword Beach, the British made the most significant progress. This success was due to the arrival of mine-clearing vehicles alongside Lord Lovett's commandos. To the sound of bagpipes, these elite soldiers advanced through the German lines without difficulty. After repelling an attack by the 21st Panzer Division, they continued their advance and linked up with the paratroopers. Despite varying degrees of success, the Normandy landings had been a triumph. The next day, all the beaches were under Allied control, and the arrival of reinforcements and supplies began, while a series of floating docks were constructed to facilitate the operation. Through the Normandy Beaches, Americans and British had to systematically reduce German defensive positions, heading towards the strategic port of Cherbourg on the Cotentin Peninsula in western Normandy. In their advance, they encountered less organised resistance than expected, as Rommel was in Germany for his wife's anniversary and was soon executed for his alleged involvement in a plot to assassinate Hitler. He insisted on personally directing the campaign from Bavaria, causing his generals to sometimes wait more than 24 hours for orders to arrive. Such inactivity allowed the Allies to finally capture Cherbourg on July 26th, only to find that the Nazis had blown up the port, rendering it unusable. Despite this, Allied progress was unstoppable due to their numerical superiority. On July 9th, Caen fell, clearing the way into France, and by the end of August, Paris was finally liberated. The beginning of the end for the Third Reich had started. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you could give it a like and subscribe to the channel.